Alrighty. So, oh, I've seen this one. Yeah, I've seen this. Look, no vampires beyond this point. Interesting. I have no idea what the fuck vampires do back there, but they're simply not permitted. Perhaps it's because they sparkle in the sunlight. Yeah. If you know that, if you get that reference, it's because you're a fucking loser. All right. You should not watch that shit. You should watch normal things. I only have seen that because I, got to get me some bitches. So here we go. Apparently, 14-year-old bitches is the way that goes. So, the Situation Incorporated has a contribution margin ratio of 80%, a break-even point of $187,500 in revenue. How much revenue must be generated to make an operating income of $250,000? This is about as difficult a question as it gets. Okay, like truth be told. So if you are coming upon this video because you're like, wow, man, that's tough. Is that supposed to be easy? No, it's supposed to be very difficult. Okay, so in other words, if you don't get this one, don't feel stupid, man. It's hard. So let's do it, though. Remember we said before, you guys are very used to this formula, right? You guys are like, back of your hand, you know that profit equals selling price times X minus variable cost per unit times X minus fixed costs, right? But you're like, dude, I got fucking none of that stuff, right? I have entirely none of that stuff. Well, again, this goes back to just in case for insurance, every now and again, you may want to memorize in the packet those shortcut formulas, okay? So we have a couple shortcut formulas that maybe we'll use, maybe we won't use, I don't know. I'm going to write them down real fast. If you want to get break-even point in units, break-even point in number of units is what? Fixed cost over contribution margin per unit, okay? On the other hand, break-even in dollars is fixed costs over CM ratio. Okay, it says ratio down there. So, okay, break-even in number of units is fixed costs over contribution margin. Break-even in number of dollars is fixed costs over CM ratio. Oh, okay. Well, it says here, apparently we know the break-even point in dollars. We know the contribution margin ratio. Doesn't it make sense that, and by the way, just to point this out, if the contribution margin ratio is 80%, doesn't it logically make sense that the variable cost per unit are 20%? Right? Remember, everything you've ever laid eyes on your entire life can be broken down into two parts, some of which is contribution margin, the rest of which is variable cost. Every selling price is broken down to some variable cost and some contribution margin. Either way, turns out we can use the information implicit in this, can't we? Right? We go, okay, break-even in dollars is $187,500, right? That is equal to the fixed costs over what CM ratio, guys? 0.8. You guys see the trick here? You're like, oh, look at that. That's rude, right? They left out so much information. Like, I mean, the thing that should really, jump off the page normally is that we'd at least have some sort of fixed costs, but we don't. But that's okay. If we take the 187,500 times the 0.8, we get what? Turns out 150,000 was the fixed cost. Now, of course, there is the question that is, John, how'd you know to use that formula? The answer is I didn't. Like, I looked around at what I had in front of me. I have this formula. Right? And so far, I've got nothing. Like, I mean, it asks at what revenue must be generated to make an operating income of $250,000. That's all I have. Like, I write $250,000 there, but I have nothing else. So I then just go to the other formulas that I have and just kind of dick around until maybe I get something to work out. So break even in number of units would be great, but that's fixed costs over the contribution margin. We didn't have that. We had the CM ratio, and it turns out if you kind of maybe get a glance at this and go, oh, I see, you gave me the break even in dollars, you gave me the CM ratio, I can figure out the fixed costs. Okay, so 187,500 equals fixed costs over 0.8. Fixed costs must have been 150,000. So I can then go back to this formula here and plug in $150,000, right? Not too bad. Now, if we keep on going, though, what do we know? We know if you take the selling price times X minus the variable cost times X, right, you must get the what? Good. You see, if you take the variable, again, selling price times X minus variable cost times X, you will get the contribution margin, right? Contribution margin. Now, look, all we know, if you want to think about it this way, we can go back to doing it this way. If the contribution margin ratio is 80%, that means that the variable cost ratio, so to speak, is 20%. In other words, variable costs are 20% of sales, right? If the contribution margin ratio is 80%, the variable cost ratio is 20%. Well, by that accord then, we did this earlier. We said this could just be called sales minus the variable cost. All you know is that's 20% of sales, right? 20% of the sales, of means multiply, right, will give you the variable cost per unit. Make sense? And again, even that's pretty hard to piece together, but hopefully once you see it happen, you feel a little bit more comfortable with that. Okay? So now we're going to add $150,000 to both sides. Okay? And we're going to get, excuse me, I'm kind of like, I should probably break these off. So up here we get $400,000 equals what? 0.8 times sales. Agreed? 0.8 times sales. If you divide both sides by 0.8, 400,000 divided by 0.8, right, you will get sales equal $500,000. Okay? So that's tough. I mean, like, there's two really tough things to do there, right? Thing number one is to realize that you're just shit out of luck with the formula, right? It doesn't get you anywhere. And then on top of that, with all this stuff down here, you got to go, okay, break even in dollars. Oh, I see, I figured out the fixed costs were $150,000 by some real crafty moves. And then even furthermore, you have to know what the contribution margin ratio is. It tells you the percent of the selling price that the contribution margin is. In other words, it expresses the contribution margin as a percent of the selling price, okay? So we'd say, okay, it must be sales minus 20% of sales minus the 150, right? Because, of course, if the contribution margin is 80%, the variable cost must be the other 20%. And then algebraically we solve, and we get the sales have to have been $500,000 for all that stuff to work, okay? So again, it's about as hard of a question as you're going to see in the exam, but hopefully you all see that generally speaking, all these questions, no matter how difficult they get, still derive themselves from no new information. It's just a matter of applying the information correctly from the previously rather simply discussed questions, all right? So, hope you guys did well on that, and we'll see you guys in just a little bit. No vampires. What the fuck does that mean? Balloons? Really, dude?